All right, it is 5 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. If we have a few more folks joining us tonight, that's okay. As a reminder, this will be recorded and I will send out an email tomorrow with a link for everybody to see all of our recordings for tonight. And then the last 2 Wednesdays, there are also going to be recordings on there from last year, where we had some more basics of the rules. So definitely would encourage you to check those out. I also in the email will include some good resources for the rules. The USGA has a ton of really good resources. They have Rules 101, which are very basic rules all the way up through, advanced quizzes that you can take. So I would definitely recommend checking those out. No matter where you are in your rules journey, it's always good to keep learning. And I always find things that I have not seen before, or maybe the light bulb kind of clicks for me. Um, but that being said, want to thank you all for joining us. Another housekeeping item. I know, or I've heard from a few folks who would like to register in one full swoop. I apologize with the way it was set up. You have to individually register for each session. So if you'd like to join us for the next two, go ahead and go to the website and just register individually. I'm hoping the next series we do, I can set it up so that you can do everything in one full swoop. But for this time, you will have to register for each individual session. So it kind of allows you to pick and choose based on your schedule. But I want to thank you all again for being here tonight. It's still cold here in Maryland, so hopefully you're learning the rules instead of being able to be out on the course. But I think warmer days are ahead. But my name's Elisa Hermes. I am the MSGA's Director of Rules and Competitions. So maybe you've seen me at a rules seminar or maybe out at one of our championships. But again, I want to thank you for your support of the MSGA and continuing to grow your rules knowledge. If you do have any questions, I will say this presentation is a little shorter than the other ones that we've done. So we definitely have some time for questions. I will be checking in the chat every now and then, so please be sure to use that feature so that we can hopefully provide maybe some additional information or some better examples as we go throughout the evening. Here we're going to talk about Rule 8, which is course played as it is found. One of the core principles here within the rules of golf, playing the course as you find it. So a few of our goals for the evening. We're going to learn what are cats. These are not your pet animals. We're going to determine what actions a player can and cannot perform out on the course. And then if the player does take an action, maybe what they can do to avoid a penalty. So if you've joined us for some of our other sessions, you'll see these different principles behind the rules of golf. But like I mentioned, the principle behind this particular rule is to play the course as you find it. And here we see Richard Tuff's quote, "One of the greatest features of golf is that it tests the player's ability to execute a great assortment of strokes under a perplexing variety of conditions." Certainly, we've all been in a very perplexing variety of conditions while we're out there. If you haven't, then good on you. But a little overview here of the rule. We'll see in Rule 8.1, actions to improve conditions affecting the stroke. Hint, that is what cats are. Rule 8.2, deliberate actions to alter other physical conditions. And Rule 8.3, deliberate actions to alter physical conditions affecting another player. A bulk of the rule is going to be in 8.1. 8.2 and 3 are a little bit shorter, but most of the words we're going to see within this rule is going to be in that first section. So this rule covers, obviously, play the course as you find it. Here we see a course. Everything is within the boundaries, so everything in there We're going to have various opportunities to take our stance, make our swing, or make our stroke, and play the ball, play the course as we find it. So like I said, Rule 8.1, these are players' actions that improve conditions affecting the stroke. I said a bulk of the rule is contained in 8.1, and I am not lying. There we can see how many words out of the entire rule are within 8.1. But here we find out what CATs are. These are known as conditions affecting the stroke, which are the lie of the ball, perhaps the intended stance, maybe the intended swing, line of play, and the relief area, which isn't shown, but we do see a brief diagram of that. Here in section A, we're going to see actions that are not allowed. So kind of a little maybe backwards thinking. Sometimes we like to see what we're able to do first, but within the rule, we're going to see what we are not allowed to do first. And then we're going to see what we are allowed to do in section B. C, we're going to see what we can do to avoid penalty by restoring maybe some of these improved conditions that might breach the rule if we do not restore conditions to the way that they were, if we're allowed to. And in D, we're going to see restoring conditions worsen after the ball came to rest. So I'll give you some examples. There are some really good examples. This rule, I'll be honest, it did take me a little while to for it to all click. So if you pick one thing out of the rule today, that's great. If things are still a little muddy, not a problem. I think when you work through it and you look at some different examples, that really helps you bring home the rule. So in 8.2, so this is your next stroke or a later stroke. You could be on hole 1, and then this would be affecting something that you take, a stroke that you take maybe on number 18. But this is a player's deliberate actions to alter other physical conditions to affect the player's own ball at rest or stroke to be made. So these are going to be physical conditions other than in your CATs. And I'm just going to say CATs instead of conditions affecting the stroke because it saves us some words. So in 8.3, these are going to be things that affect another player. So another player's CATs or maybe another player's conditions. So this is when a player deliberately takes actions to alter physical conditions to affect another player's ball at rest or stroke to be made. So here we see again another player's CATs or maybe another player's other conditions. So improve. Here, if you see a word in red, we know this will be a definition. So this is to alter one or more of the conditions affecting the stroke or other physical conditions affecting play so that a player gains a potential advantage for that stroke. In this picture, you can see here she is trying to move away that branch because honestly, the branch is in her way of trying to hit that golf ball. So this is affecting, her area of intended swing. So she is moving that away, something we cannot do. We'll see if we're able to maybe restore things so that she does ultimately not get a penalty. So conditions affecting the stroke, what are these? We hinted at those already. This is the lie of the player's ball at rest, the area of intended stance, area of intended swing, the line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place a ball. So if you haven't been with us the last couple of nights or haven't been able to review everything, whenever you see a word in italics, whether it's throughout the presentation, maybe in your rule book, maybe you're looking through the app, those are going to be definitions. And I always like to say definitions are the building blocks of the rules. So if you aren't sure what something means, or you're looking in a rule and you think, I don't really understand that concept within the rule, go to the definitions, look up the definition of that particular word if it's in italics, and that will help you gain maybe a better understanding of what the rule is trying to do or what the rule is trying to say. So here, the lie of the player's ball at rest. So the lie, another definition, is the spot on which a ball is at rest, and any growing or attached natural object, immovable obstruction, integral object, or boundary object touching the ball or right next to it. So if your ball is at rest, maybe there is a pine cone next to it. That would be considered part of the lie. Maybe it's resting up against a wall or on a cart path. These are going to be part of the lie of the ball at rest. Loose impediments and movable obstructions. So sorry, I take that back about the pine cone. A pine cone is a loose impediment. I'm thinking of a growing, so like maybe a weed that's growing out of the ground. That would be part of the lie. So loose impediments, forget I said the pine cone. The pine cone or movable obstructions are not part of the lie of the ball. So maybe there's a rake, your ball is next to a rake in a bunker. That's a movable obstruction. This is not going to be considered part of the lie of a ball. The area of intended stance, so another CATS. The area of intended stance includes both where the player will place their feet and the entire area that might reasonably affect how and where the player's body is positioned in preparing for making the intended stroke. So area of intended swing, it's not a definition, but here we will see what it includes. It includes the entire area that might reasonably affect any part of the backswing, the downswing, or the completion of the stroke for the completion of the swing for the intended stroke. So here we get into the third definition here in CATS. So CATS, again, is an umbrella term for these multiple different terms. So the line of play is the line where the player intends their ball to go after a stroke. This includes the area on that line that is a reasonable distance up above the ground and on either side of that line. So in golf, most shots are not going to be straight. So the line of play is not necessarily a straight line between 2 points. So maybe you want to hit a draw, or maybe you're intending to hit a cut. Maybe you're not intending to do that, but the ball does that anyway. That's okay. It happens. So the line of play is just not, it's not this one straight and narrow line. The rules understand that the ball is not always going to go straight. So the line of play is a little more flexible. And the relief area where the player will drop or place a ball. So the relief area is where a player must drop a ball when taking relief under a rule. Here we can see we're looking at a diagram from Rule 16.1, so that's abnormal course conditions. But when relief is allowed for an abnormal course condition, we see our relief area, which is 1 club length. This is all covered in maybe a different presentation, so we won't get to how to take relief, but here we see there are 2 different types of relief areas based on maybe if a player is right-handed or left-handed, and where their different relief areas might be. So this would be a condition affecting the stroke. So here we're going to get into 8.1a. These again are prohibited means of improvement. So again, actions that are not allowed. We are not allowed to move, bend, or break any growing or attached natural object, or immovable obstruction, or integral object, or boundary object. So growing or attached natural objects, again, grass, branches, these are all, normal things that you're going to see out on the course. Here you see the player is trying to step down and step down on the tall native grass because he knows that it'll help him when he's trying to take his swing. That's not going to be allowed. If you're moving or bending or breaking an immovable obstruction, you're really strong, because I don't know that you could maybe move a cart path, or break a cart path, in the first case, but that would be an immovable obstruction. An integral object, maybe it is a wall that is just meant to be played where it is. You aren't allowed to get relief or anything like that. A boundary object, if you're breaking an out of bounds stake, you're not allowed to do that. That's prohibited. So these are some different examples of what you're not allowed to move, bend, or break. Additionally, you're not allowed to move, bend, or break a tee marker from the teeing area where you're from where playing a ball from that teeing area. So a tee marker for for your specific teeing area when playing a ball from that teeing area. So again, if you saw in one of our previous presentations when we're talking about the course, everybody has their own specific teeing area. So I may be playing from the silver tees. I may have a playing partner playing from the blue tees. I'm not allowed to move those silver tee markers because that is in my teeing area. So we are not allowed to alter the surface of the ground by replacing divots. So again, this is going to be in our cats. These are things affecting our cats. We are not allowed to remove or press down, replace divots, or creating or eliminating holes, indentations, or uneven surfaces. Another way we are not allowed to, or are prohibited means of improvement, so actions that are not allowed, removing or pressing down sand or loose soil. We'll get back to this picture again. I know it's a little grainy, but if you'll remember or think back to 2012 at the Abu Dhabi HSBC Championship, the sand is off the green. We'll find out a little later if the sand is on the green, what we can do. It is allowed, but off the green, Rory McIlroy brushed it aside. He was issued the general penalty because he is not allowed to do that. And I think when you're thinking about this part of the rule, think about how many grains of sand are out there and on the ground, right? Probably hundreds or thousands. I don't really know because it's hard. You can't count every single, grain of sand. So you're not going to be able to put back every single grain of sand back exactly where they were. So when thinking about this, you're not going to be able to restore the conditions to exactly how you found them before you brushed away all that sand. So when you're thinking about this part of the rule, that's one of the reasons why it would be prohibited. Same with removing dew, frost, or water. We are not allowed to do that. So these are going to be the 5 things that you are not allowed to do. And finally, we are not allowed to build a stance. So here we see the player, their golf ball must be somewhere in the tree. I'm impressed they found it. But here he saw a bench that was nearby, moved it over, and is building a stance to hit the ball. So we also cannot move loose impediments or movable obstructions into place. So this is a movable obstruction, not allowed to do that, or alter the surface of the ground by building a stance. So I want to give a few examples of actions that are likely to create a potential advantage. So again, that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent creating a potential advantage. So an action that is likely to improve cats include maybe a player repairing a pitch mark in the general area or replacing a divot in a divot hole a few yards in front of their ball on their line of play before making that next stroke. And that might be affected by the pitch mark or the divot hole. So, for example, a player is trying to hit a putt or maybe a low running chip, and they repair that pitch mark just right in front of it. That's um, creating a potential advantage for them. Another example might be a player's ball lies in a greenside bunker. They smooth footprints in front of the ball on their line of play before playing a short shot intended to be played over the smoothed area. So again, these are things that we're not allowed to do. Some examples of things that are unlikely to create a potential advantage may be before making a 150-yard approach shot from the fairway, a player repairs a small pitch mark, maybe smooths a footprint in a bunker, or replaces a divot in a divot hole on their line of play several yards in front of their ball. So that hitting that 150-yard shot is much different than hitting a low running chip. So that's going to be a difference that we see here in whether or not it's creating a potential advantage. Another example might be a player's ball lies in the middle of a long, shallow-faced fairway bunker. The player smooths footprints several yards in front of the ball and on their line of play before playing a long shot over the smoothed area. So hopefully you all can kind of see the differences between those two advantages. These are going to be in the clarifications within the rules. So if you're looking up the rules, it's 8.1a/1 and 8.1a/2. So those are going to be our different examples of whether or not it's going to create likely to create a potential advantage. So we've talked about what we're not allowed to do. Now we're going to see actions that are allowed, which is in Rule 8.1b. So in preparing for or making a stroke, a player may take any of the following actions and there's no penalty, even if doing so improves the CATs or the conditions affecting the stroke. They can fairly search for their ball by taking reasonable actions to find and identify it. Here we'll see maybe language pointing us to some other different rules. I know next time we will be talking about Rule 7. So that's where we're going to see how we can take these reasonable actions to find and identify it. So if you want to look forward or look ahead to next time, it'll be Rule 7.1a, where we're able to see how we can find and identify the golf ball. So reasonable actions to identify your ball may include moving sand and water and moving or bending grass, bushes, branches, etc. So here we see the player is trying to identify his golf ball. He's moving away some grass. That's a pretty reasonable action within the rules. Again, if you're not sure and you aren't really sure, I would tend to err on this side of caution, where maybe you don't want to bend or break or move or bend too much of the grass. Again, we want to make sure we're being pretty reasonable and not just hacking down all of the grass, because that's not being reasonable. So other reasonable actions to maybe remove loose impediments or movable obstructions. Here we see the player is trying to identify their golf ball or make sure that it is theirs, and they're taking a reasonable action to remove that. It looks like a rock, so it would be a loose impediment. Or if they're marking the spot of the ball to lift and then replace the ball, so when identifying it. Actions that are allowed include grounding the club lightly in front of or right behind the ball. This does not, however, allow pressing the club on the ground or when the ball is in a bunker, touching the sand right in front of or behind the ball. Again, we know that in Rule 12, which is going to be our bunker rule, we're going to be able to see what we or understand that you can't touch the sand when your ball is in the bunker. There are a few limited exceptions, but as a general rule, we're not going to be able to touch the sand in the bunker. And so ground the club lightly, when we see that those terms there on the screen. This means allowing the weight of the club to be supported by the grass, soil, sand, or other material on or above the ground surface. So it's not saying that we have to have the club hover over the ground every time we're going to hit it. It's saying that, you're allowing the weight of the club to just be supported there. You're not sticking it and shoving it into the ground. So we're allowed to firmly place our feet in taking a stance. This also includes a reasonable amount of digging in with the feet in sand or loose soil. So I know people really like to get a good stance maybe when they're in the bunker. This is allowing us to be able to dig in a little bit to make our stance. We are able to take reasonable actions to get to the ball and take a stance. So the player is not entitled to a normal stance, swing, and they must use the least intrusive course of action. So what does this mean? If you can picture for me, maybe we can think back to our player at the beginning. She was trying to move that branch out of the way. She has to go and enter that area in the least intrusive way. So it may be by taking a different path to walk in, but a player might not necessarily be entitled to how they would think they should get a normal stance. You're going about by not making sure you're not, going in there super intrusively and moving everything away, bending everything, breaking everything. You're going in there carefully so as not to, you know, break everything. You're wanting to just take your stance accordingly and as best as you can. Sometimes you're not able to do it normally, but um, you know, that's how the rules are seeing that. You are allowed to make a stroke or the backswing of a stroke that is then made. This includes firmly placing the feet, but when the ball is in a bunker, touching the sand in a bunker and taking the backswing is not allowed. So again, it's a prohibition that we'll see there within the bunker. So here we can see the player is making a stroke. There's a golf ball there. I don't think you can see that, but there is a golf ball there. And he makes a swing and he makes a stroke. And by the end of it, the bush is no longer there, but he's completed his stroke, and that is totally okay within the eyes of the rules. So within the teeing area, this area, there are a lot of things that we are allowed to do that we are not allowed to do in our other areas of the course. But you can place a tee in or on the ground. You can move, bend, or break any growing or attached natural object. And you are allowed to alter the surface of the ground, remove or press down sand or soil, or remove dew, frost, or water. So these are all things that we are allowed to do in the teeing area only, in your particular teeing area. We're going to want to look at Rule 6.2b. This is the teeing area rule. We did touch on it in a previous presentation. I know I keep referring to those, but the teeing area is just somewhere where we're allowed to, pull out a mushroom, or we're allowed to, break things that are natural there within the ground. You're able to do a lot of things within the teeing area. So on the putting green, we have certain permissions. Like I mentioned earlier, we were gonna get back to this Rory McIlroy situation. But on the putting green, we are allowed to remove sand or loose soil, and we're able to repair damage. So it's something that I definitely would recommend if you make a ball mark or a pitch mark there on the green, you're gonna want to repair that. You're allowed to repair animal hoof prints on the putting green. The putting green there are more permissions than what you might see maybe in the general area or bunker or penalty area, but you're definitely allowed to do these things. And I do want to point out, you're allowed to remove the sand and loose soil on the putting green, regardless of where your golf ball is. So I think a lot of times people think, oh, my golf ball's not on the putting green, I'm not able to remove sand or loose soil. You are allowed to do that no matter where your golf ball is. And in the bunker, we are allowed to smooth sand to care for the course after a ball is played from the after a ball played from the bunker is outside the bunker. Again, we're not going to get into the specific bunker rule. That is Rule 12, like I mentioned. But we are allowed to care for the course in that way. And I always recommend raking a bunker after you've played out of it. And finally, we are allowed to move a natural object to see if it is loose. But again, if the object is found to be growing or attached, it must stay attached and be returned as nearly as possible to its original position. So if we're moving the grass like the player is right here, we're going to want to make sure that it goes back to how it was. But if you're moving a natural object to see if it is loose, maybe a branch, you're seeing if it is loose. If it's not, you're going to want to leave it there. Because again, what's one thing we can't do? We can't bend or break natural objects. So we're going to want to leave it as is. So what happens if maybe, you know, we've improved our conditions affecting the stroke. We've moved, bent, or broken an object that maybe breaches one of those 5 things we saw in Rule 8.1a, or maybe we've moved an object into a position. How can we avoid penalty? So here we're going to see a lovely chart, things that can be restored. So things that can be restored. So if we're moving, bending, or breaking, growing things or attached. So if we're maybe moving aside a branch, and that branch is able to get back to where it was, then we're restoring that area and we're going to be able to avoid a penalty. Um, Maybe move, bending, or breaking an immovable obstruction or a boundary object. So maybe you've moved that out of bounds stake. If you're able to get that back to how it was, you're able to put it back into the little hole that it was in, and you've restored it, you're able to avoid a penalty by restoring that. Things that may not be restored might be altering the surface of the ground. So like I said, with the sand example, you're not going to be able to get every single, grain of sand back to where it was. So there, we're not going to be able to restore those conditions to how they were beforehand. And same with removing dew, frost, or water, right? We're not going to be able to wring back our towel out and put all that frost back on the ground. So there you can kind of see some differences between if something can be restored versus if it's not able to be restored. So here we'll see how to restore an object, or sorry, how to restore when moving or bending an object. There will be some limitations. So the improvement must be eliminated and you must use the original object. So when we're talking about must use the original object, it's going to be maybe that out of bounds stake. If, you can't just go get a different stake and put it back in there to restore. You have to use that original object in order to restore those conditions. And here, how to restore when moving an object into position. So before you make the stroke, the player may avoid penalty for breach of 8.1a parentheses 2 by removing the object that was moved into position. So here we're back to the bench example. The player who moved the bench into position, if he removes the bench before making the stroke, no harm, no foul, and he is okay, and he has been able to restore those conditions back. So here we're going to see restoring conditions worsen after the ball has come to rest. So maybe they've been altered by any person other than the player, or maybe an animal. In the clarification 8.1D1/2, generally speaking, a player is entitled to the cats they had when the ball came to rest. So we like to think that once our ball has come to rest, if something gets altered, then the player is entitled to having their cats when that ball came to rest. So if the cats are worsened, without penalty, the player may restore the original conditions as nearly as possible to what they had before. They may mark the spot of the ball, oops, sorry, and lift clean and replace the ball on its original spot if it is reasonable to do so to restore the original conditions, or if material ended up on the ball when conditions were worsened. So, excuse me. Maybe your line of play was worsened by a pitch mark in the general area, and that was made by a ball played by someone else after your ball came to rest. Excuse me. Then you're able to restore your original conditions as nearly as possible. So you're able to fix that pitch mark, if it's in the general area. So your ball came to rest, another ball is hit or it's played by someone else, that makes a pitch mark. Well, when your ball had come to rest, that pitch mark wasn't there originally. So you're able to restore those conditions that had been worsened after your ball came to rest. So if our conditions cannot be restored, then what we are going to do is we're going to lift and replace the ball on the nearest spot that is not near the hole, that has the most similar conditions, and is within 1 club length in the same area of the course. So restoration is not going to be permitted when done by the player or their caddy, or another person other than a referee when authorized by the player, or maybe natural forces have caused the conditions to worsen. We're not able to restore at that point. So for example, if a player's caddy or partner walks across a bunker to get a rake and leaves footprints in the sand, that worsens the player's line of play. We're not going to be able to restore those conditions because their caddy or their partner has worsened those conditions. So in 8.2, we are going to see players' deliberate actions to alter other physical conditions to affect the player's own ball at rest or stroke to be made. So these are These are like future things. So the player must not deliberately alter other conditions where the ball might go after the next stroke or where the ball might go if it moves before the next stroke. So here we can see some examples of players' actions listed in 8.1. So these are actions not allowed to improve conditions that would then be in breach of 8.2 if taken. Include maybe a player's ball is just short of the putting green, and although their line of play is straight at the hole, the player is concerned their ball might come to rest in a bunker. Before making the stroke, the player smooths sand in the bunker to make sure of a good lie if the shot to be played goes in the bunker. So here the player is thinking ahead of time where their ball might go. Again, maybe the player should, you know, practice that putt a little better, maybe off the course if they're worried that it might go in the bunker. But, they're thinking, oh gosh, my ball might actually go in the bunker. So I'm going to go ahead and smooth that area where it's going to go. That would be in breach of this rule. Another example might be a player's ball lies at the top of a steep hill, and because the player is concerned the wind might blow the ball down the hill away from the hole before they're able to play it, the player deliberately presses down the grass at the bottom of the hill in case the ball might come to rest there. So that's where the ball might go if it moves before the next stroke. So here we are not going to be able to do those things. We do have an exception, however. So actions to care for the course. There's no penalty under this rule if the player alters any such other physical conditions to care for the course. So if you are raking the bunker to care for the course, that is okay. So here in 8.3, the player must not deliberately improve or worsen the conditions affecting the stroke of another player. So maybe another player's lie, maybe another player's stance. The player must not deliberately worsen those conditions. Alter other physical conditions to affect where another player's ball might go after the stroke, or if it moves before the next stroke. So here we're looking at a player's deliberate actions to affect another person's play. So, they're essentially, it's when we were thinking about 8.1 and we're seeing the things we're allowed to do. This is a player doing something to affect another player's play. So we're concerned with the player's deliberate actions, but this is only if it's affecting another player's cats or future physical conditions. All right. So again, we want to make sure when we're thinking of 8.1a, we are thinking about the player's conditions affecting the stroke. So their cats, again, this is the lie, area of player's intended stance, area of player's intended swing, the player's line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place a ball. So these are those 5 different things that are the protected conditions affecting the stroke. And so again, we're going to make sure that when we are going to make our stroke, we're doing these in the least intrusive way as possible. But we are allowed to, identify our golf ball, maybe move things around so that we're able to identify our golf ball, but we're not going to want to break off a piece of tree, right? We want to play the course as we find it. That's the major or main goal of this rule. We're going to play the course as we find it. All right. Again, we don't want to alter other physical conditions like we saw there. And then finally, we want to be careful not to deliberately alter another player's cats or maybe another player's physical conditions. So that, like I said, this one's a little shorter than usual. So if you do have any questions, feel free to send me an email. You can call us here at the office. We're happy to answer or walk through any questions that you might have. But thank you so much for taking some time out today to join us. Um, Again, I'll send out this presentation tomorrow to everybody, and then it'll also be posted on the website. So thank you for your time today and have a good evening.